It's here. It's finally here. I'm finally doing my end of the year videos later than most people doing it, even though it's closer to the end of the year, and I feel like I'm late to doing an end of the year video at the end of the year. I understand some people doing it more towards the middle of December, maybe even early December. Things getting complicated with the holidays. Maybe this YouTube thing is their full-time job and they just want to break at the end of the year. I totally get that. I totally get wanting to just have some rest before getting back to work the next year. But I'm in a position where I want to actually get these things out close to the end of the year. And so I personally have no shame waiting until the end of December to finally do these videos. As you see from the title, these are my 10 favorite albums of the year 2022. I'm zipping up my pockets, or it's just the one that was unzipped. Okay, I'm gonna do just like I did last year, where I'm gonna release my top 10 best movies of the year right after this. So even if you click on this video right when it came out, the movies video should be out by now. It should be there waiting for you to watch it if you want. I'm gonna actually do some things a little bit different though this time. I'm gonna talk about my top 10. I'm gonna have my honorable mentions, but I have a few other things that I want to add to it to make it a little bit more exciting and just more eventful of a video, and not kind of just the stereotypical here's 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, you know. I want to spice things up a bit. I don't want to start by talking about a few of my least favorite albums to have come out this year. I don't plan on doing any worst albums or worst movies videos at all, just because I prefer to talk about the best stuff of the year and reflect on the stuff that had me feeling the most positive and most inspired, most moved, rather than most bored and upset and frustrated. You know, I don't want to kind of remember that stuff, if that makes sense. But I don't mind talking about a few. First one I want to mention is In Loving Memory by Blackbear, who I'm already not a fan of. I've talked about him a bit in the past. I mentioned that I think he's actually better as a featured artist. I still very much stand by that to this day, even though in that case I still also don't think he's all that great, very inconsistent, and this album was just hard to sit through. I also think it proves just how much better of a drummer Travis Barker is than a producer, because the production on this thing is incredibly lacking. But I don't want to linger on that one for too long. Next album I want to mention is Will of the People by Muse. I wasn't surprised that this thing turned out this bad, because in my opinion, after Absolution, each Muse release has just been a steady, slow decline in quality with each one. And yeah, their last album wasn't good. This one I think is probably my least favorite from them, which I think kind of sums it all up right there. Last one I want to mention as well is Honestly Nevermind by Drake. Honestly, it grew on me somewhat, just a little bit. I don't think it's as bad as when I first heard it, or even the second or third time I listened to it. It is kind of cool looking back now, seeing that Jimmy Cooks, which was the last song on here, kind of a teaser to the album Her Loss, which I do think is a much better album. But beyond that, there really is little of much else interesting with this thing. I just hope that Drake tries more on his next release and doesn't just phone it in so much. Enough with that though. I want to get back to the good stuff. I want to talk about my favorite EP that came out this year. That is Hip Hop 50 Volume 1. This was produced and curated by DJ Premier. Just a really great short batch of songs here with some excellent features and contributions from everyone alike. I, in particular, really love The Root of All with Lil Wayne and Slick Rick. Might be my favorite on here. Looking forward to see what else they do in this hip hop series celebrating the 50 years of hip hop. Next thing I want to mention though is my favorite mixtape that came out this year. It somewhat pains me that I can't actually include this in the best albums of the year, because if this was technically a studio album, you can take it to the bank that this would make my top 10. That is 10 by Westside Gunn. Very pleased with how this thing turned out, especially since his last project, which was earlier this year, was really not that good in my opinion. But this was just a huge leap in quality from that one. Excellent production on this one from the likes of Swizz Beatz, The Alchemist, even the Westside Gunn's son as well, which is pretty cool. And a great posse cut as well to end this thing. Red Death is a huge highlight off of this project. Last thing I want to talk about before my top 10 are my honorable mentions. These are going to be the 5 albums that just barely missed the top 10. They're still good though, and I do still want to give them a quick shout out. Fosora, just another very interesting journey that Björk takes you on with this thing, sonically speaking, lyrically speaking, really nothing too new from her, but just sticking to her strengths, and I think sounding great doing it. Vinyl Days, the last album by Logic under the Def Jam label. This thing is definitely a bit too long. I can see why some people might find it bloated, but I do also think that with that, there are a lot of good songs that come from this thing. I did enjoy some of the guests that appeared on here, some cool samples. It can be a little up and down and messy at times, but I do overall really enjoy the aesthetic of this thing, and just in general, I think the highs much outweigh the lows. Entering Heaven Alive, this was the second album released by Jack White this year, taking a more stripped back acoustic direction, and I think it works pretty well. Herbert's The Return of Ab-Soul, coming 6 years after his previous album, and pretty much sounding like he never left and he always was there making music, even though he mentions that he did take a break, and he mentions his absence in this album more than a few times, but I think you get what I mean. Lastly, I also want to mention The Family by Brockhampton. As disappointed as I was initially listening to this thing, I do think overall it is a solid project, and I can actually see myself revisiting this more often than TM, just because I do think it is better in the context of this being sort of the tail end of Brockhampton's discography. I think the song Brockhampton is a fantastic closer. I want to give Kevin props for the lyrics on that one. I think he just does a great job at paying his farewell to Brockhampton, to the Brockhampton fans, and that soul sample at the end hits very hard. With all that out of the way though, let's waste no more time and get to my top 10 albums of 2022. These are my personal favorites, what I think are the best. My favorites, here's number 10. Fear the Dawn was the first of 2 Jack White releases we got this year, and it saw him kind of sticking to the same experimental roots that created Boarding House Reach, but also going in a heavier, more raw direction, more electric infused style. Going in some very interesting directions with regards to the production, which Jack White does all himself, and just the songs themselves too, most notably Heidi Ho, featuring Q-Tip of A Tribe Called Quest fame. This is easily one of the weirdest and just strangest singles, but also just songs that I heard this entire year. And I can't help but love it, honestly. I can see why some people would absolutely hate this thing and just never want to hear it again, but I can't stay away from it. I like it a lot. As a whole, the album did have a pretty cool balance of different sonic spaces that Jack has explored throughout his solo career at this point, which I did appreciate him just kind of pulling from different parts of his musical journey. My top tracks off of this thing would be Taking Me Back, The White Raven, Heidi Ho, That Was Then, This Is Now, and Morning, Noon, and Night. Number 9, we have Renaissance by Beyonce, her first solo album in 6 years, if you don't count the Jay-Z collaboration that happened 2 years after 2016's Lemonade. This one going in a dance slash house slash club direction, which I was somewhat concerned about at first, knowing that it was going to be that album, just because there have been other attempts at that type of style this year that I really didn't like. You know, I think it goes without mentioning, you saw what one of my least favorites albums of this year was, but Beyonce really killed it on this one. I think she took the dance genre and just made something very fun and unique, but also complex with it. And I just want to give props to all the personnel on here, the producers, the mixers, the musicians. I think everyone did a really good job here for the most part, and it just sounds like everyone was having fun making this thing, which I don't know how you wouldn't. Some of the catchiest and ear-candiest tracks landed on this thing. Some track standouts off of this thing for me would be I'm That Girl, Break My Soul, Church Girl, Plastic Off the Sofa, and Summer Renaissance. Number 8, I had TM. I do think this was the better of the 2 last albums we got from Brockhampton. Well, like I said, The Family, in my opinion, is a better send-off for the bands. I do just think that as a group effort, this was miles above that one, not only because The Family is basically a Kevin solo project, but just the collaboration from all the band members in this one. I think led to a lot of good songs. As sad as it is that this is how Brockhampton had to go out, I think that they did at least go out with some solid projects, especially I think TM being a really good one. Some of my favorites on here would be FMG, Keep It Southern, Better Things, Crucify Me, and Duct Tape.
The money counter ding, it's so exciting. Summertime, Winterfell.
It's Almost Dry by Pusha T. This was one of my most anticipated releases of this year. I liked every single that came out, even more with each release, from Diet Coke to Hear Me Clearly to Neck and Wrist. I was just getting even more and more excited hearing about the fact that it was pretty much all gonna be produced by Pharrell Williams and Kanye West. And then, you know, the drama also with Kanye and Kid Cudi leading up to this thing. It was supposedly gonna have their last song on here together. All of this stuff was getting me really amped up for this thing. And for the most part, it didn't disappoint. There are a few duds on here in my opinion, but I liked a lot of this thing, the vast majority of it. It's a Pusha T album, so there really isn't much different with regarding the lyrics. A lot of it is about cocaine, about streets, drugs, kind of the typical stuff you hear from Pusha. But this album did also dive into some more mature subject matter, with the song I Pray For You, I think, being the biggest standout with regards to that. That one being one of my favorites on here, in addition to Let the Smokers Shine the Coops, Dreaming of the Past, Neck and Wrist, and Hear Me Clearly. This may be a shocker. Some of you may have expected this to be higher. I know I definitely did when I first heard it. I still really like Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. I'm still in love with a lot of this album, but admittedly it has shrunk on me somewhat. There's certain moments on here that do feel a bit bland and unnecessary with regards to the therapeutic approach that Kendrick took on this thing. Songs like Die Hard and Purple Hearts, I think, being among the most dull. But I really liked Kenny's honesty in this thing, the rawness, the just no hesitance for laying it all out there, and really just not caring about what people will think, how they'll interpret it. And I mean, it's paid off very well for him. This album did great commercially and critically, which I think was very well deserved for Kendrick. Hopefully his next release will come sooner than 5 years, but some favorites off this thing for me are United in Grief, Father Time, Count Me Out, Savior, and Mr. Morale.
Free the buzz, toppings a bag, hella diamonds in a stash, currency and cash, put the bullshit.
Just when I think that my albums list is kind of being finalized and that I think I sort of have my top 10 locked down for the year, Little Sims comes through again with another great project and is kind of messing things up for me. I'm having to rearrange my list now and think about where I'll want to incorporate her. Sure, in comparison to some of her more recent efforts, this maybe isn't as ambitious or as epic feeling as, like, sometimes I might be introvert especially. But man, sometimes albums like this just need to be praised, especially with context to when it's released, the time of the year, you know, the time between the artist's last album. And I think this was just damn good, you know, for her to just come out with this out of nowhere. I think she really pulled off a very good album. I don't know what else you want me to say. It's really good. You guys should listen to it. Some of my favorites off this thing were Gorilla, Silhouette, X, Heart on Fire, and Control. So if I lose my roof, ain't talking about no drop top. Diaspora Problems by Soul Glow, an album that I was not expecting to like this much. Also kind of just coming out of nowhere. Heard good things about it, gave it a listen, and wow, this is just a huge burst of energy. And it really has only gotten better since the first listen. You know, I know in my reaction to it, I said that it's kind of hard to label it and place it under a genre. Overall, this is definitely a punk record. This is a punk rock album, but I did really enjoy the hip-hop elements that were infused into this thing, along with the punk rock hardcore aesthetic they were going for as well. Just a great adrenaline-filled experience. I would love to see this band live. I'm sure they would just kick ass. Some standouts for me off of this thing are Gold Chain, Jump, Driponomics, God Bless Y'all Real Good, and Spiritual Level of Gang Shit. Switching gears completely, we now have at my number 3 spot Ants From Up There by the band Black Country New Road, which may be their last album. I don't know. I really haven't read too much into what is happening with the bands right now. For those unaware, the lead singer and guitar player of this band, Isaac Wood, left the band just days before this album came out on February 4th. And I don't know, we're still kind of waiting to hear what's going to happen, but if this is the last album from the band, then I think it's a great way to go out for them. And certainly an emotional and tear-jerking one at that. You know, I personally have not been moved to tears listening to this thing, but I can definitely see why some people are very heavy on the emotional side. I really just enjoyed the simplicity of this thing that has some of my favorite instrumentals that I've heard all year. All the jazz influence was really cool too. Some tracks standouts off of this record for me are Chaos Space Marine, Concord, Good Will Hunting, Snow Globes, and the amazing finisher, Basketball Shoes.
My temptations are amplified when I get alone. Try to separate the action from the man I hold.
Melt My Eyes Seer feature by Denzel Curry. This was an album that I did a review for, and I liked it quite a bit upon my initial listens. I enjoyed a lot of the songs, and I've really only come to enjoy it more and more since then. I've found more to relate to. I've found more substance within the subject matter that Denzel dives into here. Some of you may remember me really not liking X-Wing hardly at all upon my first listen. I was a little bit annoyed at the last as well, but those are both songs that have really grown on me quite a bit, especially X-Wing. The chorus I think is so catchy now, before I thought it was horrible. And I think it is one of his best albums in his discography. I can now, having given the album more listens since the time that it came out, see why Denzel himself said that this was his favorite album that he had made, at least at the time. He said that. I don't know if he's changed his mind since. But similar to Jack White's Fear of the Dawn, it does kind of pull from some of Denzel's other projects. I can see the Taboo influence. I can see where the stepping stones are between Imperial and this record. I also just enjoyed the more prominent use of live instrumentation and natural sampling that occurred throughout this album. There were real pianos and real drums mixed in that sounded fantastic. It's a good step forward for Denzel, but also doesn't step too far away from what made his other projects so enjoyable in the first place. Some of my favorites on here being Walkin', Mental, Troubles Ain't No Way, and The Ills.
Staring at this city, but you trapped inside the hole. Get your back up off the road.
Jid's The Forever Story was an album that had already a tremendous amount of hype and critical success going for it just days after it came out. I didn't actually listen to it right when it dropped, but it was a couple days after, actually the night of the MTV Video Music Awards. After that ended, I listened to it that night, and I thought it was pretty good. I wasn't in love with it. There were some tracks I didn't like. I did think that there was too many stylistic changes in the album, particularly in the second half. It's a little bit more chill after the incredible first leg of songs that are, I mean, I love them initially, still love them to this day. But I did, in general, think that this album was a bit overrated. I didn't think it was as great as everyone was saying it was. And to be honest, I don't know if it would have even made my top 10 albums of this year if I had just listened to it one time. But obviously, it's now at my #1 spot for my top 10 albums of 2022. I did grow to like it a lot more. And you know what, I can see why some people may still have issues with the sonic changes that occur throughout this project, especially going from a song like Surround Sound to Cody Blue 31. There's a big change there, and initially I did find that very jarring. I have no problem with that at all now. The variety in this album, the different phases it goes through, I think work so well and flow so well. And speaking of flow, Jid's flow is absolutely all over the place in this album, switching up in the midst of different verses from the first half to the second half of a specific track, different parts of the album. It's just all over the place. And there's so much versatility with Jid's delivery here, not only with his rapping, but his singing as well is phenomenal. Not to mention that his pen game is on point as well. You could listen to this and have it on as a background and enjoy it and bob your head to it. When you actually listen to what Jid is saying, it's compelling. He's actually telling some interesting stories with some of these tracks. I could just go on and on about how much I like this album, about how many things in it work for me. The production is all really good. In my opinion, it's a lot of versatility there as well. All the features I think are on point. The album also has some of the greatest beat switches I think out of this entire year. It's my favorite album of this year. It's my favorite hip-hop album of this year, and I can definitely see it still remaining one of my favorite hip-hop albums of this decade once we reach 2029 and we're reflecting on the 2020s. Some of my favorite tracks on here include Can't Punk Me, Surround Sound, Cody Blue 31, Systonym, and Money. Alright, that is it. That is all I got for you guys. I don't know if you could tell, but I actually had to refilm these last two parts, the last two albums. Something happened, I lost the footage, so kind of a bummer, but now that I'm actually at the end of the video, I don't mind as much because I'm about to be done. I can just start editing this part again. But that's all that I have for you guys to close out this video here. I'll do more of a proper closer for the top 10 movies video, kind of wrapping things up for this year. And I'll just see you guys then. Peace out.